Thanks so much for having me. For those of you who don't know me, wear a lot of hats, but one is the honors program director for robotics and control engineering, which is one of the oldest honors programs on the engineering side of the house. So I'm going to try to talk about the process that we've cultivated to guide students through their research experience there, and it's kind of targeted as a STEM audience, but I think there's probably some lessons to be learned here in a lot of different fields, whatever your discipline is. So, some background back when I was an assistant professor, they tried to give me a really easy service job. And this is before we had an honors program, I was the 495 coordinator. And my job was really just two things. Number one, get all the paperwork for all the independent study students to the research office on time before registration, which usually consisted of about a two-page proposal. It's kind of a template available on the website if you haven't seen it before, and just organize a poster session at the end of the semester. So I call that the old laissez-faire model, where really the student and the advisor sat down and wrote the proposal, and there was very little oversight there. It was almost just the purpose of it was really to make sure no one registered for the course without an advisor or a topic. But nobody graded the proposal, nobody kicked it back, nobody provided feedback on it. I mean, maybe the advisor would make revisions, but no outside party. And if I could have graded those proposals, which I didn't, and it wasn't my job, but if I could have, I would say that on average they were good. Like you could see the mean of this bell curve is above a B and somewhere between a B and an A. But there was a lot of variance there, and a lot of the reasons that the quality varied would be, well, this preparation for this was really an overload, both for the advisor and the student. Sometimes the advisors were highly engaged and they would kind of meet with the students every week to do some reading. And other times there would be a conversation or two. And that was okay because it wasn't, a formal requirement. A lot of variance in the scope of the problem. Some people propose these huge projects that could never be done in a semester. Others, something really tight. Obviously, the students themselves vary, and there's technical challenges that come along with research. And I think it's tempting to kind of use the Einstein model here and say, well, like things are going to vary. Like that's what research is. We don't know what the outcome is, but I don't know if I totally buy that. So maybe something for the audience to think about and post in the chat. If you kind of think about a recent midshipman research project that you advised that didn't live up to your expectation, or maybe didn't live up to the student expectation, like, can you think of some of the non-technical reasons that might have happened? Like, so not because some equation turned out to be not solvable. But, were there different things you could have done to prepare that would have really set them up for success? So you could post that answer in the chat, and maybe that'll be a fun thing to come back to for the Q&A at the end. So my thought when I took over as the honors program director was that, like, it really shouldn't be that way. Like the distribution on these proposals should be like a Marine haircut. It should be high and tight, right? The average should be high. These are all like honor students, like a quarter of them have 4.0s. They're getting one-on-one mentorship from professors who are experienced researchers, and they have a whole semester to write the proposal. So all our honor students now in the spring take a 2-credit course to prepare. And basically what we've done is if you take that list of reasons I gave before that the quality of the proposals vary, we tried to isolate what I have in green and orange here is things that we probably could control and plan for, and try to build a course around how to address some of those issues. So in the words of Don Rumsfeld, they're known knowns. Those are the things in the green box, things we know we can alter. And there's known unknowns, some things that might be the risk of the project and it's the nature of research. And that's okay, but we can still mitigate those risks or prepare for them. And then very rarely we have totally unforeseen setbacks like ROM and building issues and things like that. In my experience, those are rarely the thing that derails the project. So we want to build a course that focuses on mitigating the impact of these first two sources of variance. So I like acronyms, and I guess people in the Navy do too. Some of mine are better than others, but when I approach this course, I think about these as guiding principles. And I think whatever your discipline is, these are good things to think about. So the first thing is I think the course has to be discipline specific. I don't think it would be possible to make a course like this yard wide for research in all disciplines. I think it's kind of like when people try to give you tenure and promotion advice. Sometimes they try to make the advice so general and vague so that it fits all the disciplines, that you're like, that didn't really help me out. Like there must be expectations in my discipline and I'd like to know what they are. So that's an important part of our framework. Another important part is that there's a saying in engineering, the plan is nothing, but the planning is everything. So students often say like, well, I don't know what'll happen when I try X, Y, or Z. The course of the project could change. Why make this detailed timeline? But I try to impress upon them that just thinking through those things is really valuable, even if it turns out that the plan does change inevitably later. The next two are really, really important to me. First of all, it's got to be an iterative process. So I don't just mean the writing of the proposal. Everyone knows writing's iterative. You write and you get feedback and you make revisions. But I mean even the definition of the problem. So very often students come in with just a really loose topic of what they want to work in, but to turn that into a detailed problem statement, it seems to require that the student read some related work, maybe write what they want to do, maybe talk to the class or to me about it, maybe even go and try some of those things, get some feedback, and then revise that. So we have to have a couple chances for that to happen throughout the semester. And we watch these problem statements mature and get more and more narrow and focused as the semester goes on. Another point that is really easy to forget is that these students are rank novices at research. And that's easy to forget because these are our honor students. And again, I said like a quarter of them have a 4.0. But they've never done this before. They're very used to succeeding in like a traditional, well-defined environment. Like, here's the score for the PRT you need to get an A, or, here's the solution for your thermodynamics homework, and here's how you solve this kind of problem, and that's that. This kind of open-ended thinking, writing, defining your own problem, they've never done anything like this before. So we're really careful about giving them rubrics, examples, and chances for low stakes evaluation throughout the course. I know in some fields it's super common to do that. In engineering, sometimes we just don't use rubrics as often as we should because there's sometimes just a right answer and that's that. But in this case, it's really important to show them what the expectations are for the course. And then the last component that I forget about sometimes, because most of these projects are solo, but these students really like having a sense of community, some interaction with their peers. So we have a lot of chances for like peer editing, presentations to the class and discussion, mentorship from me or from their advisor. There's a human or social component there. I don't want to make this sound a little cheesy, like I'm like the first person to ever discover these things, like some clickbait magic 10 weird tricks. I know there's other courses on the yard that do this kind of thing, and you all probably know these things. But the question is, in your department, like if you don't have a course like this, you do them, but do you do them consistently? Do you have a system, a true system in place for them? If they're done as like an overload, with busy students, busy faculty, a lot of these concepts are like the first one to drop off when you get busy. So I'm not saying any of these things are just earth-shattering concepts, but we try to be really conscious of them and build in multiple points in the syllabus to touch on them. So in terms of the course structure, it's got a lecture and a lab. We try to make the labs pretty interactive. In terms of the sequencing of the topics, it more or less mimics the sections of the proposal, but we shuffle the order to reflect the fact that, in scientific writing, we rarely like just start by writing the abstract. That's usually the thing we do last. So we kind of shuffle these around in a sensible order. And I know not everyone can, is going to read the whole syllabus, but I just want to emphasize that, we try to build in a lot of places those concepts that I talked about in the previous slide, that it should be interactive, it should be iterative, there should be room for planning and social discussions and all that. So in terms of the students, day one, I ask everybody what their concerns are. And for the fact that, again, these are all super high achieving students, maybe because they're super high achieving students, they tend to have a lot of anxiety about this process. You might not think they would because they succeeded in so many other things, but they really want to do a good job, but they really don't understand like what's expected of them, right? So a lot of things they'll say is like, I have so many things I'm interested in, I don't know how to narrow it down. Or is my topic too big? Is it too small? I don't even know what research is. Or I tried to read some papers, but I just couldn't get through them. They're like so difficult. It took me forever. Or I talked to this advisor and I really liked them personally, but I don't really understand what the expectation is. So I kind of let them get all that out, kind of journal about it a little bit, and they reflect on it at the end of the course. Then I spend some time on the first day talking about what I think undergraduate research is in my field. And it's a pretty tough thing to define, I think. I would challenge any of you to do that for your field. I mean, you're basically taking someone who does not even have an undergraduate degree, and you're going to ask them to create some new knowledge in that field. So, I spent some time talking about easing some of their fears, talking about how research can be very incremental. It's sure it's novel, but it doesn't have to be all novel. There could be just some small novel component of it. We make a distinction between research and design. What's different about them? What's the difference between just acting like a lab technician and being a real investigator? And this becomes like an important touchstone, this discussion. We come back to it a lot during class. So when we start to talk about the proposal, we start to say, like, is this part you're doing here, is this really necessary to advance your research agenda? Or is this just some thing you've kind of tacked on because you would like to do it? So I'll come back to that. For the first homework, we have them go out and read all the project advertisements that faculty members put out. We have them write a reflection on what they've enjoyed about the major, what they might like to learn more about, what kind of activities they felt very fulfilled with when they did them, perhaps in their previous courses or labs. I have them read a couple proposals from last year's students to kind of see what the end product should look like. Remember, they've never done this before. They have no idea what the goal is here. Then I have a social meet and greet with all the potential advisors and some of the first class who are working on projects. And that really, really seems to help kind of break the ice, but also gives a sense of mentorship between the firsties and the second class. And then for homework, I arm them with a list of 10 questions and I tell them to go interview two possible advisors. So they always did that, but it tend to be more advisor driven, the chat. So this kind of forces them to ask some questions to the advisor, like, what are your expectations on our interaction, like in terms of frequency, preparation, how hands-on will you be? What will the day-to-day work in this field be like? Like, it might sound like this awesome project to cure cancer, but day-to-day, I'm really just going to like debug computer code. That's fine, but you should understand that before you get into the project. So that brings up kind of a unique feature of the course, I think. I call it the three-party system, but there's the student, and in a way, they have two bosses. I assign 70% of their grade, and part of the justification for that is I see all the projects. So I try to enforce consistency across the projects. I try to push them on their intermediate milestones, kind of keep them on pace. I give them much more frequent feedback than the advisor since I see them twice a week. And I'm kind of a neutral audience, someone who doesn't know a lot of background there. So I can kind of say to them, like, this part of the proposal is really not clear until someone who's not from the field. So I give 70% of the grade, and the advisor is tasked with rating, like, are they really developing expertise in that subject area, helping them scope the project, helping them come up with infrastructure. It could be like lab equipment, existing software, data sets, things that I might not know about that are really project specific. But it's really important, I find, that the advisor weigh in on the grade because when this experience is over in the fall, I'm going to turn this student over to their advisor, and they're supposed to run with this plan. So if the advisor hasn't bought into this plan, if they just feel like, oh, you just had to check this box for your course, then the whole thing's kind of a waste. So I'm not married to the percentages, but I think it's important that both of us weigh in. In terms of the labs of the course, this would be like a couple examples. They're really different than a typical engineering lab, and that's why I'm showing you. So like a lab might be like searching for papers for a literature review. The pre-lab would be like, go talk to your advisor, get some suggestions of popular journals or big researchers in the field, or what are some good keywords to look for. Then I'll do a brief discussion of some like non-obvious things. Like in the age of Google, everyone just thinks, you just type it into the search box, and that kind of works well most of the time. But there's some things you'd be surprised they don't know about. Like everybody, over 30 knows about like a Boolean library search with ands and ors and stuff. But sometimes they're like, wow, I never saw that before. I show them how to use the citation map in a lot of these databases where you can kind of pull the thread and see like well, this paper is good, and they cite these other papers, and that's how I can get access to those. I talk a little bit about quality metrics for journals, and how people do those kind of rankings. And then I let them loose and I let them try to find papers related to their project there on their laptops. And I kind of group them loosely in teams by topic. They're solo projects, but if I have 3 or 4 projects about drones, I'll put those students together and let them form a lab team. And again, this is that social or peer support component to the course. We do another lab like that on how to read a paper. Uh, You'd be surprised. This is a huge, huge challenge for students to sit down and read a scientific or engineering paper. These papers are hard for me to read sometimes. So the approach that I've gone with is I select a paper for the class. I kind of pre-screen one. I'll show you an example in a minute. I have a little discussion about the anatomy of a scientific paper and some concepts like, don't expect this is going to be quick reading. It's 5 pages, but it's not like reading 5 pages in Sports Illustrated. This is going to take some work. But also that we don't read it like from start to finish. We read it with a purpose. We're kind of scanning for certain relevant things. If we find highly relevant things we want to use in our project, then maybe we'll come back and reread that. And then the lab part will be to actually read that paper on their own and write some summary notes and kind of compare. So, for example, like here's an article. You can't see the details, but I kind of found a quality journal article that's often related to some of our student projects, not related to everyone's project. And I kind of have annotations or call outs that show them like what are the roles or what are the conventions within our discipline where people tend to slip certain important pieces of information, or what might you want to get out of this section. So doing this takes a lot of time and a lot of preparation, but I find that just letting students loose on any paper they find, it can be very, very difficult for them to get through. In terms of the homeworks, what do they look like? Each homework is really writing a section of the final proposal. And that principle that they're true novices and they've never done anything like this before, I have to reflect that in the homework. So for each homework, I've written an example section really carefully that tries to really illustrate, and sometimes multiple example sections that illustrate like a range of style of products in our discipline, like maybe more experimental work versus more theoretical work. And then I try to annotate with call outs, like what's notable or interesting about this example. And they find this really, really, really helpful when they go to write theirs, especially that I write like multiple versions for different styles or different types of work within our field. They can almost always find something that fits what they want to do. Something else I do for the homeworks is I have a single course-wide rubric, basically meaning a rubric for the whole final proposal, since that's really what the homeworks are. It's cloud-based and it's shared between me, the student, and the advisor. So a couple interesting things here is that for each section, I put some really discipline-specific criteria. Like maybe in history, you wouldn't address these issues necessarily, and that's fine. But I know in my field that would be an expectation. So I'm not shy about putting that in there. I put a document locator in there so the advisor can really quickly find the document in the cloud, so they don't have to like dig up the proposal every time. This is like a living, evolving document. So I have rooms for both me and the advisor to provide feedback, and I also have a draft section and a final section. And my goal is for every student to turn the B's and C's and whatever in the comments in the draft section over to A's and no negative comments by the end of the semester in the final column. I'm not shy about that. I'll give everybody an A if they deserve it. So that's where we're going. This is constantly, each week they're coming back to this rubric and saying, what are the outstanding issues I have to tackle? We do a lot of group presentations in class. So this might be an example. So demonstration is the word we use for like, basically, what are your experiments that you're going to do next year? Or what's going to be your activities you're going to do next year? So here would be an example. A student says, well, I'm really interested in drones, and we knew drones can fly around and take good aerial imagery. So I think that this algorithm X, is capable of stitching together all these individual snapshots to produce a nice panorama of the ground below. And, to do that, you kind of have to align on different features, like maybe the roadway or something like that. So that might be a problem statement they would propose. And then they would show to the class like what their plan is to demonstrate this. And this is like a very typical thing that Jim would say. They'll say, well, first we're going to build a custom aerial vehicle. We're going to mount all these sensors. And we'll have to know if the plane's like tilted when it took the picture. So we'll make that algorithm. We'll make an autopilot to fly it. Then we're going to find approval to fly the drone. Then we're going to collect some pictures. Then we're going to implement the algorithm that we want to focus on and assess the results. So this is basically, they propose like 40 weeks of work not related to their problem. I mean, it's related to their problem statement, but it's not necessary to do their problem statement. And then this part is really their focus of their research. So the class gets into a whole discussion with each piece, and the questions I arm them with is like, is that necessary? Is it efficient? Is it risky? Right? And a lot of these activities are not necessary or efficient. Like maybe you could just buy a drone that has all this on it, or maybe you don't even need a drone. Maybe you could just like download a bunch of images, right? It's super risky because anytime you put electronics in the air, they could crash and blow up, or it could be weather concerns, whatever. And by the end of that discussion, not so much from me, but from the class, we've kind of pushed them towards this more realistic plan, which is to go on this online database and download some geotagged aerial images from someone else's database, and then spend the rest of their, 38 weeks worth of work to focus on their research project. And you'd be surprised how many students feel like this is cheating. Like this is like, oh, no, but that's like cheating to do that. I'm like, no, that's what good researchers do. They focus on just the problem at hand, and they try to minimize the impact of all these external things that are, perceived as risky. So I'll skip that part there. Another really important component of the class for me, and the students agree with this, is I give everybody some project release time. So after everyone's done their reading, after everyone's come up with a problem statement, after everyone's made a plan of their experiment, I give them about 2 weeks to just go in their advisor's lab and like try some stuff, like do a tutorial, get some training on how to do whatever, start building something or doing something. You almost always don't know what you don't know until you start. And that really is a positive experience from them and the advisor. And they all come back and say, wow, that totally changed my plan. That totally alters what I think's important, or what I think's feasible, or what I want to grade myself on. So that's been huge. I spent a little bit of time teaching technical writing, and I tried this a lot of different ways. And I think it's really not because I want to teach it, but it's by necessity. After I read all these proposals, I'm like, ugh, ouch. So I guess my advice to you is, if you want to do it, don't attempt to complete treatment. It's so boring to do that, and often it's not necessary to like make it into like a general writing course. So I try to be brief. I try to be interactive. I try to focus on like being efficient while being precise. And I really try to focus on the things that most of our students were taught to write by English teachers, which is awesome, and they're awesome writers for that reason. But there's a lot of things that English teachers don't talk about, like writing an abstract. It just doesn't seem to come up a lot in English courses or history courses. I'm sure it does at the advanced level, but not in high school very often. Also using non-textual elements like figures, equations, tables, and so forth. That doesn't seem to come up a lot, and they need a lot of work on that. So I won't read all this, but this is an example of how I do it. I talk really briefly about the concepts, but then we have like a daily, like 5-minute in class exercise. Like it'll just be this. I'll give them, take out your laptop, take this list and rewrite it as a single, complete, properly punctuated sentence with parallel grammatic construction, because every proposal has something like this in it. And every single time I grade it, I make the same comment on it, right? So just let them do that. Or learn how to write an equation that's properly punctuated, define all your variables, or take this crazy abstract that a real midshipman wrote and trim it down into 200 words or less. The second to last homework, other than the final proposal, is for them to write their syllabus for next year. And you'd be surprised that when I saw the 495 proposals, they sometimes had like a vague milestone list, but they almost never had like a true week by week syllabus. And I wouldn't teach any other course without one. So I make them do that, and their advisor sign off on it. In terms of results, I mean, I guess I'm biased, but I feel like the quality and the consistency of these proposals that I've seen after this process are really high. Like I'd be really proud to share any of these with someone outside of the department. Some of them look better than like O&R proposals I've reviewed, that the scope's smaller, but the quality is really high. When I poll the students about, if their concerns from week one have been addressed, overall, it's a yes, and I feel so much more comfortable going into this, and the softs are positive. There's still some outstanding challenges out there, but I think every course has challenges. So I'm going to stop there, and then I want to hear what you have to say. What do you think some of the